Hey guys, subscribe for daily content. And if you're shopping for gear, make sure you check out the description for the newest items at some of the very best online retailers. There's also links for some of the items that I personally recommend. Thanks!
What's going on YouTube? Metal Complex here, and today I've got a really interesting knife review / knife overview to share with you guys. This is the new Kunwu Gringo, which comes in a steel called S390. Not M390, but S390 from Bowler. What the heck is that? I'm actually going to talk about it right off the bat. But first, thanks so much to my patrons for supporting me. This knife is available. I will link it down in the description. It does help my channel when you use those links, but that's entirely up to you. Thanks to Kunwu for providing this knife for review. So S390, in terms of like the lifespan of steel, because a lot of our favorite steel that we considered like, you know, super modern and high tech, and a lot of that stuff has been around for like 20 years or more. So as far as like the lifespan of steel, S390 is relatively new. I have never heard of it. I had never heard of it until this knife came out. It is a Bowler steel, same company that makes M390, M398, right? A bunch of other stuff, LMAX. What is it comparable to? Apparently, it's very similar to another steel I've never heard of called T15. If you're wondering where I get a lot of my information, obviously knife steel nerds, but I got this specific information from an application called Z Knives, which I know a lot of you guys have on your phones. It's very helpful, right? Very, very comparable apparently to a steel called T15, right? Red hot, high speed steel, I guess. I'm not a metallurgist, just telling you guys the brief information that I read. People on Blade forums, so grain of salt here with this one, are loosely comparing it with Rex 45. I'm almost certain that somebody will have a huge problem with that. And you know, make sure and type up a very long paragraph as to why it's not helpful for me to say that it's comparable with Rex 45. So loosely comparable with Rex 45, I guess, if that gives you an idea. This is a steel that is not stainless. It's pretty tough, not insane-o tough, but pretty tough all things considered, because the HRC range can get really high. I think typically you're going to see this stuff harden from 65 to 68. Apparently, in 2019, there was a company called Case Knives. Not the case that we're thinking of, but it's K-A-S-E out of Switzerland, a company I'm not familiar with. Back in 2019, there's a video they did where they showcased a blade made of S390, hardened to 68 HRC that cut through a steel nail and a brass tube with no edge damage. That's pretty crazy considering the high hardness. So I thought that was pretty interesting. I guess in a simple way, I can understand why people would compare it with Rex 45. But mainly what I want you guys to know here is that it's not a stainless steel. It sounds like it would be Bowler S390. I don't know why, but it sounds like a steel that would be stainless. It is not, right? So just remember that before you purchase. You can obviously pick these up with DLC, which is going to help out quite a bit with corrosion resistance, or non-coated. What is Kunwu hardening these to? Their range is 65 to 67, which everything that I read says that that's within the normal parameters, right? Probably the coated ones, because the coatings are going to reduce the range just a little bit. Those are probably the ones that are going to be more on the lower end of that HRC range, and your uncoated blades will be more towards the 67. Either way, this is definitely going to be a high performance steel that is going to, if you're worried about specifically edge retention, yeah, it will hold an edge much longer than something like properly heat treated M390. But yeah, that's it. I don't have a science lesson for you guys. That's not the type of channel that this is. Just wanted to give you guys just a little bit of info on S390. I highly encourage you to seek out additional information on your own. It is not a blade steel that there's a ton of information on in general, and it's not a blade steel that we see in the current modern knife world, like hardly ever. I had never heard about it. So anyways, let's go ahead and measure this knife. This is a big knife. Overall length is coming in at almost 8.5. It's like 8.35. Blade length is coming in at 3.65. Cutting edge is 3.25. How about some size comparisons? Any custom scales you find in this section can be found down in the description under original goat and others. So up against the AD10 and the AD20.5, we are definitely more in 80-10 territory. Not quite as robust, but very tall in the blade and very similar in terms of overall length. Let's put it up against the Spyderco PM2 and the Spyderco Para 3. There we go. Definitely bigger than both. It's about like it's very similar in overall length to the PM2, but it's definitely like a larger knife. And then finally, let's put it up against the Benchmade Reptilian, or in this case, the Ritter Hogue and the Hogue Deca. How's the action on this knife? Well, if you're not familiar with Kunwu knives, I'm happy to say that Kunwu knows how to make a knife with nice action, nice detent, right? They typically do this stuff really, really well. And just to catch anybody up who's not familiar with Kunwu knives, Kunwu is kind of like, they're kind of like the Chinese Spyderco. And I mean that in the best way possible, in that they are the Chinese company that is experimenting with wild and crazy blade steels and actually getting the numbers up where they are optimized or very, very close to optimized, right? Obviously, it depends on whether or not the blade is coated, but they're doing stuff like that. They typically have pretty good edge geometry. This one's maybe a little thicker behind the edge, not by much, but their quality control, this is something that's not similar to Spyderco. Their quality control is very, very good, right? But I guess that's kind of how I'd refer to them. The best thing about Kunwu is that they're doing all of this. They're doing all these wild and crazy things, and their pricing, in my opinion, has not gotten out of control. A lot of times when a company, kind of finds their space, they find their identity, and they start to get really popular, their pricing starts to get wacko. A lot of people are going to look at this and say, oh my gosh, Kunwu prices have gone through the roof. I remember when you could get them for 190 or 200, you can still get them. The difference between what you're looking at today and the models that you are referring to are night and day. You're comparing something that is what I would call max level Kunwu. Damascus pivot collars on both sides. We have textured and contoured DLC coated titanium with a full backspacer and pocket clip. And then you have an exotic blade steel. S390, right? Coated like a DLC coating, a satin DLC coating. So if you are about to type up a paragraph about how Kunwu's prices have gotten out of control, number one, they definitely still offer baseline models that cost substantially less. Their prices with those have hardly increased at all since the time that people would reference. You cannot compare something like this with something like that, because this is an evolution, right? That's like, you compare Charmander and Charizard. Those are two. One of those is completely evolved, right? You can't do it. So as far as what Kunwu is charging for what they're doing versus apples to apples, true apples to apples competition, I think Kunwu is still doing an excellent job. I think they're still definitely a unique and special company that's providing unique and special knives that really outclasses a lot of their competition, right? This knife is no exception. It is definitely within there. Sorry, you're going to hear the baby monitor over to the left of me. Sorry about that. Just part of what's going on today. Yeah, the action on this is very, very good. The access to the lock bar, not cut out lower on the show side, but plenty of access there, and chamfering on either side, so very easy to disengage. Falls down, contacts the thumb in the choil. The detent ball already well up on the face of the blade, which means you can turn it, let it fall into the closed position. Really great. Access to this oval here is enormous. It's very deep in here. The blade's really tall, so you have essentially strider access. That's really important. When deploying the blade, it makes this feel super organic. There's no digging involved. And if you don't like to do the reverse flick, it's incredibly easy to thumb flick. You can also front flip it if you want to. The action's great. The detent's great. There's really nothing to complain about. Let's do carry profile thickness up against the Spyderco PM2. This is a little thicker, but it's also contoured, and it feels appropriate for the size of knife that it is. This is definitely a larger knife. Not an XL knife, but a larger knife. Carry profile, length, and height up against the PM2 and the Para 3. Definitely going to be larger in the pocket than either of these, and you will feel it. This feels like a big knife. You're going to feel like you're carrying a big knife. If you're used to carrying something like the AD10, might not be that big of a deal. But I feel like the majority of people don't carry pocket knives that are that big, so most people are going to be adapting to this. Materials, we already went over it. Titanium, lots of titanium, Damascus, and then a fairly thick S390 blade. I bet that's at least 135 thousandths, perhaps even a little bit thicker. Let's go ahead and do that real quick before we weigh it so that we can get an idea of how much weight is in the blade. So it is about 137 thousandths, but it's very tall. There's a lot of steel there. So the weight on this, I am guessing we are close to 6 ounces, at least 5.5. Could be quite a bit more though. And 5.8 ounces. Oh, nope, sorry. A little update there, 5.9 ounces. That does not surprise me at all. However, I would venture to guess the balance is very close to the pivot because of how big the blade is. And I am exactly right. The balance is actually really nice on this knife. That makes all the difference in the world on a big knife. On a little knife, I mean, it's something you can point out, right? But perfect balance on a little tiny lightweight knife doesn't mean very much. Perfect balance or near perfect balance on a big knife like this, that makes a big difference when you're using it, for sure. So anyways, let's go ahead and do a hardware check. I'm going to get out my tools as per usual. My tools are very inexpensive and very recommendable. You can find them right down in the section of my description that talks about the tools I use on this channel. I believe everything is a T8. T8 for the pivot. We got, T8 for the body screws, same one for the pocket clip. You have a reversible position for the pocket clip and then the same T8 over here. It's a basic frame lock running on bearings. Very easy to take apart and put back together. As long as you have the right tools for the job, should be good to go. Meat and potatoes time. We have almost like a tactical harpoon battle shovel, right? Some people like tall blades and some people don't. I noticed in my community post about these because I was really excited about this. I like harpoon notches. I like how comfortable they feel, right? Especially in combination with a good forward choil. It's the same reason that and I understand it's not the same thing, but it's the same reason that I like the stitch so much. I love that this sort of pinched in area that's created by the combination of a good harpoon notch or thumb ramp and choke up spot or forward choil. Really, really like that. I first came to enjoy it on the XM18 3.5-inch harpoon Spanto. That's my favorite blade shape on hinder knives. I just love it. But I think this is really cool. I also like a taller blade. Not necessarily because I feel like I'm getting some sort of imaginary level of utility out of it. I just like how it looks. So I like this. Not everybody likes a tall blade though, you know. In this case, we have a big flat and a huge swedge that's created or able to be created because we have this harpoon notch here. The flat's carried out maybe 65, 70% the length of the blade. Comes down to a nice strong tip considering how much material is behind the tip there. Nice cutting bevel. Like I said, it's not like the thinnest thing in the world, but it's not like super thick either. Somebody was saying that it was, you know, not that I measure. You guys always ask me to measure behind the edge thickness. Part of the reason I don't do that is because of how unreliable the measurements are. We have countless examples of content creators. I'm not going to name names. Like, it's hard to do, right? And just by talking about this, I'm going to get a whole bunch of people down in the comments telling me how easy it is and exactly how to do it. Okay, the evidence of this is like the widely varying results of measuring this is we have a bajillion different content creators out there who all try to measure behind the edge thickness. And they all are widely varying. The difference between, you know, like two different people measuring, it might not seem like very much, but to somebody who's trying to like min-max or whatever and measure the optimal performance, the tiniest bit of error can imply incredibly suboptimal performance. So truthfully, as much as you guys would love for me to measure that, the only thing that will accomplish is people arguing about how disappointed they are with certain OEMs and companies not having their opinion on the optimal behind the edge thickness. Want to know how I know that? Because all the content creators who do it are met with exactly that backlash in the comment section, which again is based off of probably a pretty big range for error, right? Again, I know you want to tell me that it's easy to do and that I could be doing it. I'm telling you why I'm not doing it, right? But feeling it out, yeah, it feels very similar to, I guess, a lot of like industry standard blades, right? I don't tend to judge off of measurements. It's kind of the same reason I don't weigh knives or measure the blade stock thickness before I carry them. I like to just throw it in my pocket and see what my real experience is. Because my actual experience carrying a knife, I think, is a lot more valuable than my assumed experience based off of varying measurements, right? Or measurements that can have a little bit of variation. I mean, even measuring the blade stock thickness, right? There's a little bit of variation there even, you know? So my experience carrying this knife was, it feels a little big, a little heavy. I didn't really have an experience with the blade that made me feel like, this doesn't feel good to cut. It feels fine. It feels very similar to a lot of things that I use day to day for simple tasks, right? But it feels fine. It's a big, wide blade, right? Might slow you down a little bit depending on what you're cutting. Thank goodness we have a satin DLC finish on the blade, though. Definitely reduces drag versus something like a chalky finish or a bead blasting. But anyways, there you go. The blade doesn't feel incredibly thick or incredibly thin. It just feels pretty normal, right? Anyways, we've moved on, I guess, into the, have I said the whole meat and potatoes thing? I mean, we did all the measurements, right? We weighed it, and we did the blade stock thickness. We did the hardware check, yeah. So ergonomically, this is nice and open, but I have to say, this, I don't love areas like this back here because it makes me feel like my hand is supposed to fit perfectly in here. So we have this palm swell, and I think the intention, because it feels better like this, the intention is to have the index finger here, and then you got this finger here, and then your pinky sitting right here. I don't love that, but this swell right here makes a little more sense. I want my hands to lock in between this space, and my hands are a little bit too big for that to be the case. Choked up, however, this is a much more comfortable position, especially if you can get this finger about right here on this hump, but nothing feels perfect. It feels pretty good. No position feels perfect, and I just don't like these little cramped butt hook things. I don't like them. But rest assured, the ergonomic lines are good. Nothing about this knife makes me feel like, oh gosh, I'm uncomfortable, right? This is a pretty aggressive texturing. I think you have a few options for the finishes on stuff like this. It is contoured though, and the edges are nicely chamfered. So no part of this knife feels sharp or aggressive. And the pocket clip, Kunwu's milled clip, right? Just really, really great. Whether you're choked back or you're choked up, even squeezing it, there's no part of that pocket clip that's really sharp. It's awesome that you can mount this for right or left-handed carry, right? This kind of reminds me of, is it the salt flats? Is that what I'm thinking of? It just looks like very flat earth that's been exposed to sun for so long that it's starting to crack apart. And it's cool to look at, right? I think some people will find this irritating, especially if you have like sensitivity to certain textures. I don't talk about that a lot. But I, for example, if you didn't, here's the secret about me. I crumple, touching the yellow foam that's inside of old mattresses, or I remember I got a tear in the seat of my truck. In high school, I drove a 94 Chevy Silverado. I got a tear in the cloth, and the seats had yellow foam underneath. And I would avoid that spot in my seat like the plague because I could not stand the feeling. It felt like it gripped to my dead skin. To this day, it makes me shiver. So I'm not like that with any other texture, but I do not like how that feels. This has a grippy texture to it that might bother some people. I know that sounds weird, right? But no matter how, however you consider yourself, right? Maybe you consider yourself this stoic monolith of, perseverance or whatever BS you make up in your head. There are, in terms of the total number of materials and textures that you have interacted with on this earth, you have experienced less than 0.0000001% of things that have the potential to bother you in a way that you didn't realize could. So before you say, don't be so sensitive, before you say something like that, you probably just haven't experienced something that bothers you, right? I can totally understand why this texture might not, be something that a lot of people like. Some people like a little bit more of a smooth surface, and some people, it just feels like something that might bother some people. Not something we usually talk about, right? Considering this is an object that is almost exclusively operated with the human hand, it's worth pointing out, right? So consider that. If you're bothered by certain textures, consider getting the smooth option, if that is an option. I'm almost certain it is, right? But anyways, moving on here, the blade, I do like how the blade looks. I think it's cool. This looks like it's got scratches and things on it. It's really just from whatever I was cutting last. The DLC, in my experience, has held up beautifully well. I think the example that I have that has the most potency behind it is with my own Excalibur model, which has definitely not been babied. Everything that I thought, I've used my keys to try and scratch that blade, and even when I thought I finally got it, it wiped off. I still have not managed to scratch it. I think I could probably throw this across my concrete driveway and mess it up pretty good. I think that might do it, right? But short of using a rock or a piece of concrete to like grind into the blade, I think normal cutting tasks are just not going to scratch this. It's going to be a fingerprint magnet for sure. So if you don't need the DLC coating, or you don't like how it looks, or you don't like all the fingerprints, like you can see here, as soon as you touch it, right? If you don't like that, then I would consider getting the non-coated version. But again, this is a rare Kunwu knife and blade steel that is not stainless. So getting the DLC coating is going to not make it stainless. It's going to significantly increase its corrosion resistance, right? So it's circumstantial. It depends on what you're going to use it for and where you live. I do like the fully functional jimping that extends almost the entire distance to the harpoon notch. I think that's great. I kind of like the little, it's like a tactical gardening shovel. I kind of like that look. It just looks cool. I like a tall blade, but not everybody does. I understand that. Got a lanyard hole back here. That's thoughtful. Sergio, it's thoughtful, to think of the 7 people left on Earth that still use lanyards. Oh, come on. Don't get mad. Don't get mad at me. We have a stop pin located in its traditional position. No shouldering, but it doesn't need it. No blade play up, down, left, or right. No lock stick. No pivot lash. Nice and smooth and consistent in here. And a nice clicky detent with perfect centering and no detent lash. The base price of this knife, I believe, is $329, which is a lot of money for a pocket knife. But when we talk about knives, especially when we're talking about Chinese production knives that are crossing that $300 price point, right? We know what to expect from $200 to $250, roughly. I don't know about you, but I'm not expecting anything too crazy. I'm not expecting Timascus parts, not expecting satin DLC, usually not expecting contoured, right? Especially in combination. I'm also, you're probably going to get S390, M390, right? Stuff like that. Nice blade materials, but nothing wild, nothing super new, right? You might get S90V. But when we cross the $300 mark, I always say, if you're going to do that, you better bring it. There better be something special there. I expect contouring, check. I expect texturing, check. I definitely expect a substantial knife, personally. I don't want a little tiny little mini thing, even though the size of the knife isn't going to dictate the price as much as people think, right? I want a milled clip. I want a milled backspacer, check, right? I want something extra, something fancy, some embellishment, some cool texturing, check, right? We got the Timascus pivot collars. It would be neat to have an option for like a flashy, shiny DLC. Check, right? Got to pay a little more for that. And then, while it's not that absolutely necessary past the $300 mark, a wild and interesting or less common blade material would also go a long ways. In this case, double check. S390, not cheap, right? So anybody looking at that price tag and thinking that it's a bit too high, I would ask you, compare apples to apples. Look at the rest of the knife market. How many knives can you say realistically are keeping up with what this is at this price point? Chances are the best examples that you can come up with are missing at least 1 or 2 elements. So that's why, right, I don't pull this assessment out of my butt. I'm really thinking, what does this compare with? Can we price anything else comparatively with this? Like, is anything like really truly beating this? Are there elements here that not everybody needs? Sure. but that doesn't mean that they don't cost money. They still cost money whether you need it or not, right? You have to ask yourself whether or not these elements are worth it to you. But putting these things on the knife, or creating a knife with these elements, like, yeah, it's going to cost more money. So the base price of the knife, $329, I don't think is bad. I also don't think their markup for the DLC is bad either. So I'm not really unhappy. I think the best version of the knife is definitely going to be the uncoated version. It's kind of a bummer that you're probably going to get a lower range with the DLC. I should actually confirm that with Sergio. In some cases, companies will take extra efforts to increase the HRC on the coated blades. I don't think that's the case with Kunwu. But this is, again, it's a non-stainless composition. So the DLC might be very, very important for some people, and it's going to cost you some more money, right? It's getting up there to be pretty darn expensive. But it is cool. I think that some people are going to go head over heels for this, and other people not so much. Kunwu has so many great models that I don't think they make a bad knife. I like this one. Personally, it's not my absolute favorite, but it's like, I don't want that to sound bad, because nothing that they make is that I truly dislike. I just have knives that I like more. But this is cool. If I was going to spend this much money on a Kunwu, I don't know that this would be my first choice, but I do like it. Generally speaking, at this price point, right? Not as a pocket tool in general. If you're going to reduce it to that, go buy yourself a $20 knife, right? I'm sure it'll be fine. But at this price point, comparing to apples to apples, do I recommend this knife for people looking for something like this? Oh yeah, for sure. I think the price is fine. So that's where I'm at on that. That's going to be pretty much it for today's review. Like I said, links for this guy in the description. Please make sure to follow me on Instagram at metal_complex. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like. If you'd like to check out my other content, I do, of course, have lots of videos of knives that are either expensive or inexpensive that I do or don't like, so check those out. And if you enjoy all my content, go ahead and click on that Metal Complex logo right there and subscribe, because there's definitely more coming. Thanks again for watching, everybody, and have a great day.